Hello and welcome to Faith and Honest Conversation. I'm Thomas Rowland and this is James Fount.
Hello there.
Hi, James. And yeah, we're here to talk as honestly as we can about our own experiences with faith and spirituality and hopefully make it okay for you to have yours. So, James, I don't know if you want to pick it up from here about where we'd like to go today or where you'd like to go today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so a few sessions ago we talked a little bit about internal and external expressions of God or understanding or whatever of God, and we talked a bit about how they differ, and for me, I'd said about how for myself, my understanding, my experience of God was much more internal than it was external, and that had been a big shift in my my experience from when I'd been at church to now, and when I'm no longer sort of attending a religious institution. And I can't remember exactly where we'd gone, but basically, as we talked, that there'd been some sort of uncertainty, I think, where we weren't sure where the other one was coming from. So, and I think that if I just express a little bit more about how I mean external God, I think for me, external God, as I understand it, is like God being having like an external impact on my life as opposed to an internal impact on my life, and finding it more challenging to communicate with that external expression of God, or finding it more difficult to comprehend maybe that external expression of God. So that almost all of my prayer and all of my spiritual life has turned inwards and become like an inner life rather than like outward expressions of faith or outward expressions of worship, maybe. Yeah, I think that's the best way for me to explain it. It's a bit challenging because I'm trying to remember what sparked off that thought process in me and how I'd landed on that. But it still feels right. You know, I still feel like internally I can connect to God on a very deep level, on a very like personal, intimate level. I can come inwards and be with God and sit and experience God, but there isn't like the external side of things being things like healing and manifestations of the Spirit, or what other sorts of things am I thinking of? Yeah, I think that's probably. I don't know. It's hard because I'm trying to remember what my understanding and my definition had been back when we first talked about it, and it felt really clear that. So I don't know what we go with on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sharing a bit of the difficulty of trying to understand what we said last time, which is now a few weeks ago, and pick up from there. And I think I'm coming to the point where I'm like, I've just got to give that up if I'm gonna be present in this place. And I think what your articulation earlier of God who acts outside of us and the God who acts inside us, kind of inside, kind of through us, or from within towards us.
Yeah, I suppose so. So, like the indwelling element of God, or the indwelling being of God. So, us being like a vessel and holding God within us, and that being like the way that I can connect and communicate, as opposed to God being an external being exclusively, not exclusively, but like the external God being outside of us. I struggle to sort of comprehend and relate to. So like God of all of the universe, I can get as a concept, but struggle to relate to on a personal level.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably encapsulates it for me a bit better. Yeah.
Like the images of God as maybe ruler, king,
Yeah.
creator, maybe even in that sort of headship role, or
to an extent, it's more, I suppose it's more the ruler aspect rather than creator aspect. Creator, I connect to, because like I connect to the idea of creation, and creation being like an ongoing process happening within and without. Whereas king and lord and it feels to me, and maybe this is partly where it stems from, is that there's some language that we use, particularly with Christianity, and probably with other faiths as well, that separate and distance us from God. Things like majesty, things like Lord, and sort of like this separate apart being that is unknowable and mystery and foreign and alien to us. And it kind of like you've got that tension with this sort of like loving, intimate, devoted God that loves us each as individuals and loves us all as a people and lives and dwells inside us. So I guess there's that there's a bit of an imbalance there. Not an imbalance, but yeah, tension's probably the right word. Where I can't quite get my understanding or my head around that external being or entity that feels so distant. You know.
And so, I guess the other question that's going on for me is the question. I don't know if I said a question already, but a question that's going on for me is what's kind of like, why is this a problem for you? Maybe like what's the impulse towards wanting to understand God that way? Or
I think for me that there's an element of powerlessness. Is that right? An element of like an internal God being only as capable as I kind of allow God to impact my life. If that makes sense. So that there are problems with that, and there are problems with limiting my own viewpoint to purely an internal God, and not dismissing, but not like leaving room necessarily for the external. So maybe that's where I'm landing, is that it's like my current like trajectory or pathway is more towards like an internal expression of God, and so the space for external expressions of God is more limited, and also the space for for growth and development and change and so on my faith is limited as well. Perhaps so maybe there's like a struggle in me going on, that like I've got this understanding of God that doesn't quite compute in some ways.
Yeah. And those authoritarian or authority or powerful images of God, not being able to engage with God in that way, is it a symbol or symptom of not being able to engage with those parts of you?
Yeah, probably. There's probably an element of me not wanting to acknowledge my own power and acknowledge my own agency in things. I say not wanting to, not necessarily being able to in some respects, or being afraid of that, or
it feels threatening.
It feels threatening, or like there might be a sense of expectation or responsibility on me that I don't feel able to fulfill or able to live up to in some respects, or so that quite probably is the crux of it. I can't remember.
Like, if you could integrate that part of you and not see it as dangerous or bad or something, then maybe you would be able to engage with God in that way.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I think there's like a I'm my own barrier almost in some ways to it.
And that's quite a different thing. I guess another way of engaging with God in that way is a sort of which is in how we talk about God. It's kind of like very meek or very subservient, or kind of, or it can have those connotations at least, where we are almost diminished to nothing. Like that's maybe that's the threatening side of it. Like, does it destroy us if we relate to God that way, and if we kind of relate to those parts of ourselves, will it just destroy us and destroy any agency? And
and also kind of it kind of puts us into a much more controlled setting, is that right? Where God is, because he then has this role of being Lord and King and like above and aloof and holy and all of those sorts of things. It puts us in a position of much of like, where we better do what we're told type thing. So there's like that, like maybe what feels like a slightly unhealthy power imbalance, but coupled with like the internal loving God, or knowing that external God and the internal God are the same and they love us, that maybe that's less of an issue. Maybe that's not so much what's happening. Yeah, I'm quite sort of hazy on all of this, as I think it's probably coming across.
And what you're saying at the end is that the idea of like if the king is loving, then he's not so bad.
Yeah, and so I suppose that perhaps what's tangled with my view of that of external God is a negative image of the church that's sort of wrapped around that image of God, and because that, like, the negative image of church has then been transferred onto God in that aspect, I've rejected it, and so now struggle to reconnect and I suppose restore that image, restore that aspect of God for myself. Yeah.
And how did they get mixed together, do you think?
Yeah,
or how are they mixed together? I mean, I'm aware of how they might be with me. Like a lot of my church experience, they've talked a lot about this God as head and king, and that's the God we as a group or as a tribe worship, and a mixing of or a conflation of the church as an external organization, or the leadership of the church conflated with the leadership of God, if you like, or the authority of God. Like they get really mixed up together, like, which may be understandable in many ways. But yeah, how do you think they are for you, maybe?
So I think exactly that. Like, coming from, although it was a Baptist church that I was part of, there was very, very strong sense of what the pastor said was like the way, and like any disagreement with that wasn't really allowed, or it was allowed, but it was sort of like welcomed, but in a very contained way, and in order for the pastor to then show why that was wrong and not
right,
like, you know, or like why the way they were doing things was correct.
Yeah.
Sort of, I suppose, like a false humility element, or something like that. And then, yeah, the sense that when I first had sort of that spiritual moment and attending church after that, being quite, I suppose, malleable in that embryonics or like newborn state. It's easy for ideas and concepts to quickly take root and take hold
when you don't really have any already.
Yeah, that's exactly. Or if you've got some already that like maybe would support that. So, for example, like I'd come through a Christian upbringing, so it was natural for me to sort of view church with relatively relative sort of benevolence, and believe that it was a good place and like a healthy place to be, and so that kind of supports the, well, you know, the pastor's probably right, these people who have been Christians for a long time probably know what they're talking about, that sort of thing. So then you can end up taking on ideas and concepts about God that don't necessarily reflect God, but do support this idea of, well, follow what the church is saying, follow what the pastor's saying, follow what the elders are saying. Don't it doesn't matter if you don't understand it, it's because our understanding is imperfect at the moment.
And that's part of our obedience to God. Yes,
that's it. And this obedience element, and because like God is right and good and in charge and so on, and is Lord over all, so we have to do what he says, and this is what he says because this is how we've interpreted his word, how we've interpreted what he's saying. And so that kind of like that coupling, and I mean that's broad brushstrokes and probably not quite like and a much cruder way of how it happens,
sure,
because it's a much more subtle process and a much more a much slower, maybe slower process even than that. But there's a sense, and certainly when I came away from church, there was a sense of, oh, I've lost everything, because I haven't just lost church. I've like, God is so tangled and mixed in with that view of church that I couldn't see that actually God was still with me in spite of me leaving. And so, but what as I've kind of rebuilt things afterwards, as I've deconstructed and started to reconstruct, or in the process of reconstruction, the bit that like there's never really been tarnished in some respects, or never really gone away, is this internal aspect of God that was really strong when I first came to faith. And so that's what I cling to, and that's what I've got as like I suppose as a lifeline, as a central tenet to my spirituality as it is, and my faith as it is, and so everything else on the outside is still either at arm's length for me, or I'm not really even considering it at all. In amongst that, church and an external concept of God and all of this other stuff that was kind of like tangled up together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's like different parts that are outside, and I'm still hesitant to pick up because of the fear of what that entails.
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by the word lifeline that you used, and I think when you've got a real externalized faith, so when I'm really thinking about person-centered theory here, but like when you're very externalized in the sense of your idea of God, or idea of how life should be and who you are, is very much based on what other people say, or what they have said in the past, what we've kind of internalized from that over like these subtle kind of things over time, maybe how that can cut us off from ourselves, and we end up, I think, compromising ourselves or betraying ourselves, depending on how far in the continuum you want to go. And sometimes it'll be and when we and if we have this internalized conception of God, then I think it kind of more invites us to trust ourselves more, and not, rather than betray ourselves. And I think that's, for me, I experienced that as a real life or death sort of thing. Like it's it's a hard place to be, to cut ourselves off all the time, or a lot. Like that's a hard place, and also a hard place to be, to not be aware of that. It's, well, like that takes a lot of energy, I think, and it drains us, and it exhausts us, or empties us in many ways. So I guess what I'm feeling is like, is the external God conception a threat to that sort of inner alignment, almost, or inner
harmony that sort of like that's there? I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose there is an element of that, of like the external concept of God could like it could say something, or could like want something, or express some desire or something, or command or whatever that somebody else has come up with, or not come up with but interpreted, and then you like, oh, okay, well, I don't really feel that, and I don't know where that's come from, but you're saying it's come from God, and I don't really get that. And I think certainly that there were times where I had that, and for the most part, I was able just to dismiss it. It was going, well, okay, when I definitely get confirmation of that, then I'll take it a bit more seriously, or I'll, consider that. But yeah, there is an element of it feeling like, yeah, the two expressions of God that I've kind of got, or I've experienced, aren't necessarily always the same, or always aligned, or always the same being. Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess for me, it feels a bit more trustworthy if it's the internal God feels a bit more trustworthy, like it not so interpreted, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking, when we bring it back to those parts that are wrestling in us that we can't integrate or bring together in us, like, is it that I find it's really hard for me to accept that I have the capacity to do that sort of thing to other people. Like, I have the capacity to inflict my ideas on other people, impose them, manipulate, make them doubt themselves.
Yeah. And that sort of like potential or responsibility of like, well, I've got to hold my concept of God not lightly, but recognize that what God might be saying to me is he's not necessarily saying to somebody else at the same time, or it might be saying something different to them. Yeah. And I think that like, certainly the counseling's really helped with that, because like the whole concept of being tentative with any like interpretations you've got, or anything that you come up with, or how you are with clients, it's exactly down that route of like not being heavy-handed and not like being directive, and encouraging agency and autonomy in your clients. Well, it rings true as well for when you're speaking to someone about like who's coming for advice, for let's say, or prayer, or anything like that in a spiritual setting. Yeah, and I think that perhaps that's where I've experienced like that sort of like disjointedness.
Disjointedness between
the internal and the external.
Yeah. I think I think for me, there's a side of this that's really I want to take on board. A side of like the external God that I want to be able to inhabit. And there's a side that, like you said, like a false humility. Like, it feels like there's a false side to it as well. That I also know I do inhabit more than I wish I did. And so yeah, the false side is this, what we've talked about, this kind of imposition or false humility, and I think it's really important for me to be aware of that, of how easy it is to slip into that. Even if I kind of go into a sort of internal God, well, we should all be like, we should all think of the internal God, or that's my new theology that I'm trying to impose on other people somehow, and think it's the right thing, or like, I think that's a tendency that's there. And even with counseling, like, we can it could come in, I think, or it has the potential to come in when we stop being as curious and start thinking this is what you need to do. But that, I think there's another side that, so what's going on in my head is the story of Jesus in the temple, where he just like knocks over all the tables, drives out, and a real expression of power, and otherness. Like, he was so other to the religious people in that temple at that point. And I think I want to be able to inhabit that sort of otherness that's powerful, and that's also that is an otherness that the other person has to acknowledge,
or respond to,
that feels quite different to what we've been talking about in terms of demanding obedience, or even manipulating some sort of it and I guess for me, the only way I mean, maybe it doesn't need articulating, but it feels like for Jesus that was a real authentic expression of a of something that was really going on inside him.
Well, I think it was the injustice, wasn't it? And the wrongness of the scenario.
But I think it wasn't like, I think for me the difference is that the authenticity in his response, that it was like, it was an expression of the anger that he was feeling. That seems to be different to a sort of I don't know, maybe when it becomes inauthentic, or maybe when it, that authenticity demands something authentic back almost. And it feels weird that it didn't get that. Or whereas other sort of interactions aren't about being authentic, aren't about inviting an authentic response from another person, maybe. It's, or open to that authentic response. I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting anywhere or not.
I think so. I think, if I understand it correctly, you're saying that like when that sort of like power comes out, when that sort of expression of, like, say, anger or injustice or whatever it is that comes out of us, if that's coming from a place of real well, and as it did with Jesus in the temple, that the authenticity of that was not because it wasn't for his own gain. It was because he was challenging a way things were being done that was wrong. And but there can be times where we might do things because it's for our own gain, or it's for our own like elevation. Is that what you mean? Or
no,
no?
I think, it's really helpful that you're articulating it as well.
Yeah.
I think that's making it external in my head.
Okay.
So it's like, if it's not for my own gain, this is for justice
Yeah.
or something like that, then I'm doing it for something external to me. Whereas this felt like it felt with Jesus like a very authentic sort of something inside of him had to, or was being expressed.
Yeah.
And him being him as a unique person, particularly a unique person, like that was where the difference came.
Yeah.
So it wasn't him trying to do what he should do, or it wasn't him trying to, but it was him being able to express something really powerful inside of himself, in a powerful way. Yeah.
I think I follow you.
And I think in counseling, I think if I can be as authentic as I can, the more authentic I can be, I invite the other person to be more authentic. And so they are able to inhabit that space more.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm being like inauthentic as a sort of, I'm the expert, this is what you should be doing, this is what all the theory, like obey this, then they might go into a sort of obedient role, but it won't mean that they can trust that part of themselves, which maybe we say God is there too. I feel like I'm trying to bring together many different things,
many
at once,
threads.
Yeah.
I think it's working. So, yes, because then the client wouldn't can't trust the relationship, because they're trusting the rules element of it, the law aspect of it, as opposed to the true healing power of it, which is the relationship, the therapeutic interaction, and the fact that you're there and they're there, and you're two humans meeting. I can't connect it to Jesus in the temple, but I can see how that sort of like that to some extent does maybe encapsulate what I was thinking of with, or maybe does it not? I don't know.
I think what I was more saying is not trusting the relationship, although I think you do trust the relationship more when you think the other person's being authentic. But I think learning to trust, or coming to a place of trusting themselves.
Yeah.
So they're not living in compromise with themselves or betraying themselves.
Got you. Yeah.
Because if I can inhabit that place of authenticity, because I trust what's going on inside myself, I trust the internal God. If I'm trying to pull although there must be nuances in that as well, then they can trust the internal God in them, and inhabit a space of authenticity, which can be really powerful and other.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. So it's almost like a modeling behavior, isn't it? And
modeling, but also making it okay.
Yeah, inviting somebody into that space, isn't it?
Yeah. And maybe that's what the story of Jesus can do. For us, it's like it's okay for us to be powerful and different when it's in this sort of space.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we're actually called to be much more. It's like, and so it's kind of like the internal becomes external in us.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know if that's making sense, but it's like, I'm not just hiding God into myself.
Right. Yeah.
It's like God is finding expression in how I show up in the world.
Yeah.
Which is going to be other to other people.
Yeah.
Sometimes, or maybe all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that's helped you, and I feel this pull to help you. And all the while I've been thinking, why do I want to help James with this? Why are we not just happy? Why am I not just happy exploring the experience? And so I think what I tried to do at the end more is kind of express what's going on in my experience with these sorts of things. And I'm quite aware that I don't know how that matches with.
But that does make sense. Like, and so I can relate to that a lot more than I've still got this weird external vision entity expression of God that I still don't quite connect with, but an external expression of God from within does make sense to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know. It's still a bit of a
and I really value what you said saying earlier about not wanting to dismiss something and limit either your faith or something or your possibilities, I guess, like that. That feels a really interesting way to explore our experiences when we're struggling with something. And I think it was also helpful for articulating how I kind of interact or react to certain images of God or images in Christianity or scripture. It's like, okay, why is that jarring? And what's not finding a voice inside myself? And that's it felt like a really useful way into it.
Definitely.
We're coming to the end.
Yeah, we are. I'm aware of that, and I'm just thinking, I still don't know if I've untangled this any more than I had before.
Yeah. Because I guess there's still this idea of an external God. I guess maybe we should bring it up another week.
Yeah,
maybe that's what it is.
I'll have to re-listen to our original conversation
about
it, and which I need to do. It still needs editing, and when I do, I'll be like, oh yeah, that was it. That was the issue. And then I can present it again. So perhaps by next time.
we'll do that whenever that happens, which is fine. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, James. I've really appreciated this today. Anyway, I've appreciated it, even if you're in a tangle. It's been great for me. And thanks for listening.
Thank you.